Open your Bibles this morning to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. That's where we're going to be. Hebrews 11 and 12 is where we're going to camp out this morning. Rachel and I have been married 21 years, and it'll be 21 years this May. How she's been able to put up with me for 21 years, thanks. That side of the audience is applauding. This side doesn't care. That's cool. We're off to a great start. So we've traveled, we've lived in different places. We've lived in Alabama, in Texas, in Oklahoma, in North Carolina. And North Carolina is when we had Clara, our very first, 17 years ago, almost 18 years ago, we had Clara. And because we're from Texas and Oklahoma, we would travel back with Clara when she was a baby to see family quite a bit. Now, some of you can empathize with what I'm about to talk about here. Some of you have a very unique understanding and perspective of this. But when we packed, Rachel is very meticulous in her packing. She will write a list. She will pack everything in packing cubes. It will take her about an hour to pack for a one-day trip. Right? She's like totally into it. She has a list, she knows, and she never forgets anything. For Jason, I can pack for a 2-week trip to Asia in like 60 seconds. Here's my method. I pick up a shirt, I smell it, I throw it in the bag. I pick up a shirt, I smell it, I throw it in the bag. That's how I pack. And when we had Clara as a baby, Rachel packed everything. She wanted us to be prepared for everything. I don't know what the Texas weather changes a lot. So like when we'd go back for Christmas, it could be 80 degrees or it could be -8. Okay, so she would pack hot weather gear, cold weather gear, several pacifiers, all this kind of stuff. And so when we would travel throughout the airport, it looked very similar to this. So I would have 2 carry-ons, and these are a little bit bigger carry-ons than what you're allowed, although I've seen some of you pack your carry-ons and you try to get it in the overhead bin, and it just makes me just ravenously mad at people like you who try to do that. But we'd have 2 carry-ons, and then I'd have a backpack, my carry-on, because Rachel was too busy holding precious, sweet baby Clara, who was oh so perfect in her hands in a diaper bag. But Dad would have all the luggage, and I'd have a stroller that I would inevitably have to carry through an airport because my sweet angel refused to sit in it. Sorry, I have a past history with all this stuff. So we'd have to have a car seat, right? And so the car seat would look something like this, and I would be like this and this and this, trying to get to the airport, right? Trying to run through the terminal. Slow down, Rachel, slow down, right? And I would get to the gate, and I would sit down, I'd be like, done. Like, I'm somebody who loves a gate check. How many loves a gate check? You know, you kind of pull one over fast on the airlines because they want to charge you money to check in your bags before you get through security. Nope, not me, I'm too cheap. So I would take everything, and when the gate check came, I'd throw it to the gate check agents, and then we'd be able to get on our flight. My poor, wonderful, sweet little daughter, Clara, was the angel of angels when they fly. Some of your babies, they scream on a flight. Again, the reason why God created noise-canceling headphones. Not Clara. She was perfect. So for that 2 or 3 hours, everything was wonderful. It was bliss. We would look at Clara as she slept, and we'd look at each other and go, we made that. We did this. This is wonderful. And then all of a sudden you'd hear, boom, all right, we're descending into Dallas. And anxiety would start to raise in me because not only would I have to get all these bags at the carousel, I would also have to get other checked bags, and I would have to make my way to the rental car. It's awful. That's with 1 child. We had 2. So not only I had to carry all this stuff when I had 2 kids, I had to worry about a 3-year-old like picking gum off the floor in an airport and be like, no, don't eat that. Don't touch that. Don't walk there. Don't do that. It's the only time in my life that I really thought about leashing my daughter. How many can feel me, right? It was crazy. I put up with that. And you're going, why? Why did you not ask for some help? Why did you not get a cart? Like, why would you travel like that? Well, a couple of things. Number one, didn't know that was an option. Number two, I'm cheap and I'm not gonna pay for a cart. And I would carry all this stuff, and if you saw me in the airport, you'd be like, that's terrible. Why would you do that? Well, I ask you the same thing. Because here's the thing. So many of you travel through life with so much baggage that it suffocates your Christian walk. You know how I know? Last week, I spent time, we had a wonderful altar service during healing, and we were supposed to pray for healing, but can I tell you how many times out of the 20 or 30 people that I prayed for, how many times somebody came up and asked me to pray for their insecurity, their anxiety, or their depression? 80%. You see, we travel with life with baggage that we're really not supposed to travel with. I want you to look at Hebrews chapter 12. Here's what it says. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings to us so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and consider him who endured for sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weak or weary or faint-hearted. So when I think about this passage, I think about the Christian life. We are all called to run a race. We're all called to endure. We're all called to look to Jesus. So what I want us to do today is I want us to pick apart this passage and look at the three major points that will help you in your Christian walk, which are lay aside every weight and sin, run a race with endurance, and fix your eyes on Jesus. So let's dive in. Let's talk about laying aside weight and sin. Weight and sin. The Greeks and the Romans loved games. If you study anything historical about the Greeks and the Romans, you know that they absolutely loved their games. As a matter of fact, we get our Olympics based off of Roman and Greek culture, but in Roman and Greek culture, it wasn't one Olympic game every 4 years. They had 3 every year. And what they would have is they would have these runners who were greater than any icon in the community. I mean, you know, you think Taylor Swift is big for being an NFL quarterback. The runners of these races were way, 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 way bigger. And so they would discipline themselves. They would discipline themselves mentally. They would discipline themselves spiritually, because religion and sport were combined or together often. And they would discipline themselves physically and mentally. And the way they would do that is they would go on strict diets. They would work out incessantly, and they would do all these religious rituals. And when it came to the race, they would step inside this huge arena, or Coliseum, if you will, and there's thousands of people around. And at the end of the Coliseum would be a velvet box that would have, say, a governor of the area, or a king, or a lord, or a dignitary, but most often there would be the emperor who would show up at these games. And the runner would run to the other side of the stadium, where there would be this pool of flowing blood, and they would wash their hands in it over and over and over again as a sign to say, I'm dedicated, I'm sincere, I'm ready and disciplined for this race, and every single rule I'm gonna follow to the T, and this race matters to me. And they do this as a spectacle in front of everybody. And when they got to the starting line of the race, they would strip off all their clothes, kind of like an NBA player strips off his sweatpants when he goes into the court. But they would strip off all their clothes because they didn't want anything to get in their way. They didn't want anything to be a hindrance to them. And it's the Hebrew writer that uses this metaphor as he's talking to a Jewish congregation who is facing radical adversity. See, the book of Hebrews is all about Jesus because this Jewish congregation was suffering under intense persecution. The letter's written somewhere around AD 65 to AD 70, about 2 or 3 years before Rome comes in and destroys the temple, and the Jews and the Romans were headed for a bloody clash. They were gonna go to war with one another at some point, and this congregation, that's the Hebrew congregation in which the letter's written to, this congregation is starting to doubt, because the apostles were getting imprisoned and some were dying, if Jesus actually was who he says he was. Many of them wondered, actually, if Jesus was just a man or a prophet or an archangel. And some of them even thought maybe Jesus was an imposter because he had not come back yet. They were worried, they were wandering, they were scared, they were distracted, and they were persecuted. And yet this amazing letter to the Hebrews, this amazing text happens at the end of the book, which the book is all about Jesus. You see, as people were wondering, is Jesus an archangel? Is Jesus a prophet? Is Jesus the Messiah? The Hebrew writer decides to write a letter to the Hebrews that says Jesus is greater than ... He's greater than Moses. He's greater than an angel. He's greater than the temple. And he's greater than the sacrifice. And Jesus is our great and lasting hope. And it's in the context of this that the Hebrew writer writes and talks about how we are to run a race. And he says, lay aside every sin and every weight. That's the first point there. Lay aside every sin and weight. Now, let me pause here for a moment. Sin and weight are two different things. When I originally studied this passage, I've read it so many times that I typically kind of skim over words. How many do that? Sometimes you don't see what's in the text itself, and I did that, and I was kind of reading, and then when I slowed down, I wrote everything out, and I realized that there's a difference between sin and weight. Now, let's talk about sin for a second. Sin actually is one of those things that disqualifies you for the race. Habitual pattern, lifestyle of sin disqualifies you. You're not even running. You're not even in the race. You're somewhere off in the distance. Do not fool yourself that by coming to church and singing a few songs and hearing a message and doing some works of kindness and goodness that you are set free from sin. No. Only Jesus can set you free from sin. And if you have a lifestyle of sin in your life, the only way that gets fixed is through repentance. So let's take sin and move it over here, and let's talk about weight. The writer tells us to lay aside every weight and sin. So basically strip off everything so that we can run with endurance. What's weight? Well, the Greek word weight basically means bulk or mass. It's neither good nor bad. It's not sinful. It's just neither good nor bad. So what it could be for some is it could be things like anxiety, depression, insecurity, guilt, shame. It could be stuff that really is toxic for your life. But weight can also be a job, a distraction, a relationship, a person. It's neither good nor bad, but it might be bad for you. You follow me? And this is what weight really means. Paul, in another letter in Corinthians, basically says this. He's kind of defining weight for us a little bit. He says that all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful to me. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Now, what does that mean? Well, this morning as I got dressed, got my shirt on, got my jeans on, got my boots on. My oldest daughter, Clara, helps me pick out my outfits for Sundays. So she picked this out, and I have to say, I look pretty fly today. And so this morning I get in my car and I have a choice. I could drink a smoothie, eat something healthy, a spinach omelet, a vegetable smoothie, or I could get donuts. So all things are lawful for me because I have the money to get donuts. I can get a mini donuts. I could get tons of donuts, right? Donuts are cheap. That's why I typically gravitate towards them because they're cheap. I could get any donut I want. I'm not even looking at Rachel right now. I can get any donut I want. All things are lawful for Jason, but not all things are beneficial. You follow me? There are things in your life that you can do, but not all things are good for you and the race that you are to run. So we are to lay aside the weight and move towards God. Now, what's interesting with this passage, and I want to go back here to show you in this, what's interesting is it also says, the writer says, let us also lay aside. What is he meaning when he says also? Well, he's referring back to Hebrews chapter 11. What's happening in Hebrews chapter 11? The writer is comparing our race to those in the Hall of Fame chapter of the Bible. He's saying that all these wonderful saints of the church, Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, Moses, Gideon, David, all of them had to lay aside something in order to finish their race. And so therefore also, you're to do that too. Why? This is the thing I always think of when I'm studying the Bible. Why is it said that way? Why is it written that way? Why is this point here? Why do we need to lay aside our weight and our sin? And it leads us to our second point, which is we are to lay it aside so that we can run with endurance. Look at this phrase that the Hebrew writer says. He says, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Now, if you're a note taker, I want you to write down the word race, R-A-C-E, write down the word race, and then write an equal sign and write the Greek word down for race, agon, A-G-O-N. That's the Greek word for race. Surprisingly, agon is the root word where we get our English word agony. Agony. So the writer of Hebrews has something in mind, and scholars think of two different things, two different types of races. The first one is a marathon, 26.2 miles. How many in the room have ever ran a marathon in your life? Raise your hand. Boo, right? These people are too healthy. No, I just boo you because I want to be like you, all right? You've run a marathon before. There's several right here, whether they're telling the truth or lying. There's several right here. I said, yeah, I've ran a marathon. Now, I'm looking right at you, that the last 7 miles is sheer agony. Your muscles cramp, you want to vomit, you're dehydrated, but you also are overheated, and it's just awful, I've read. Terrible pain. So the scholars think that the Hebrew writer might be referring to that race. Some think it's actually tied to the Greek pentathlon. Now, pentathlon means 5 sports. So in the Olympics, they would do the pentathlon where people would do 5 different competitions. They would run, they would jump, they would throw things. But the ultimate, at the end of the race, they would have to put on these hard leather gloves and box another opponent. Now think of it this way. You have just given it your all on a 400-meter dash, which is to me is the worst of the worst. You're not jogging and you're sprinting and it's long, it's terrible. After 400 yards, you're and somebody grabs you by the hand and walks you to a ring and say, let me introduce you to Conor McGregor. you now have to fight him for the next 10 minutes. Good luck. Sheer agony. We are to run this race with sheer agony. Why? Well, remember who the Hebrew writer is writing to. He's writing to a persecuted church. He's writing to a depressed church, a discouraged church, a church that is battling with the harsh realities of life. Tim Keller actually says that the book of Hebrews, this part in Hebrews, is actually a public pastoral counseling session. They're all broken and wounded people. They're all terrified of what they're going through. They're all hurting. It's perhaps why the writer of the Hebrews writes Hebrews chapter 11 to remind them the type of endurance they're supposed to have. Let's read it together. You don't have to say it, but I'm going to read it to you. Hebrews 11:32, it says this, "And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, of Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. But some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats and destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth." So what is the writer trying to do? He's trying to tell people who are dealing with the harsh realities of life that you are not alone. Here's what I know. People are either finishing a storm, in a storm, or about to go into a storm. That's the harsh reality of life. And culture does not help us or equip us well to handle these adversities. And I would dare say that the problem with the modern church is that we don't help people to deal with the harsh realities of life. We tell people that everything's going to be good. Just serve God and your life's going to be perfect. No, it's not. There's going to be times where you're sitting by a deathbed, wanting to know how you're supposed to deal with this. There will be moments you will open up your checking account and go, I'm already in the negative, and I have 6 days left until I get paid again. We go through sickness and disease and persecution. We have problems in life. You may go, man, Pastor Jason, you've spoken about Job before and you talk about suffering, and then the last time you spoke, you talked about Jonah and you talked a little bit about suffering, and now you're here again telling us about suffering. Why? Because you need to be equipped. Life's hard. And we have to run this race with endurance. And think about that. Think about those two words, endurance and perseverance. We don't live in a culture that really like those words. I mean, think about it. A sack of popcorn can be popped for you in 1 minute, and you sit by the microwave and tap and go, why is this thing taking so long? You go to a restaurant and somebody helps you find a table, and you sit down and you read a menu and you say, I would like this type of chicken or a donut. You do that, and then when they're slow, you go, what's taking these people so long? I demand my food now. We live in an instant gratification society, and so therefore we think the Christian life is all about now. But it's not. It never has been, nor will it ever be. We are to run this race with endurance. We're supposed to slog through the day. We're supposed to persevere because life is hard. So we drop off all our weight. We remove the sin from our life. We begin to run with endurance. And then the Hebrew writer tells us this other beautiful phrase. He says, fix your eyes on Jesus. Now, this is an amazing, amazing passage. The Hebrew writer, if you looked at the version earlier, it actually says, look to Jesus, the perfecter of your faith. Why are we to look to Jesus? Why are we to focus on him? Why are we to pay attention to him? Well, there's this phrase that comes up that says this, the joy that was set before him. And I've always wondered what that phrase meant. Like, I know sometimes I get tagged as the Bible guy. I know what I'm talking about. But there are phrases I hit in the Bible that I go, I have no idea what this means. No clue. And so let me help you understand that phrase. I want you to turn with me to a couple of passages in Hebrews. Let's look at it. Hebrews 10:34, for you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that yourself had a better possession, an abiding one. So you were able to endure hardships because you saw something greater in the future. Look at this passage, Hebrews 11. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, when Moses grew up, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. So Moses gives up all the pleasures of Egypt to be mistreated because there was a greater reward. Hebrews 13 at the end of the letter. Therefore, let us go to him outside of the camp and bear the reproach he endured. For we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come. So the idea of the joy set before him is we give up something to gain something far greater. That verse, chapter 2, saying, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, what they're saying is he's the one we look to. His example is the one of endurance is the one we model. So we get rid of all of our baggage. We run a race through hardships and pain of life because something greater is just beyond us. So follow Jesus. That word that says look to Jesus doesn't mean look. It means to look undistractedly, to be laser focused on him. And the modern church typically isn't. We're distracted by all kinds of things. Like, think about it this way. Have you ever seen somebody run a 100-meter dash, like in the Olympics or something like that? You know, they get in the starter block and the pistol goes off and boom, they launch out of those starter blocks and they are dead set on the goal. They're not looking at grandma going, hey, grandma, look at me run. They're not looking behind them. They're not looking at their opponent. They're dead set on the goal. Why? Because if they do anything else, they'll veer off track. And that's what we do. I mean, Jesus even said this in one of his parables. He said, no one is fit to plow a field if they're looking backwards. My dad is a farmer, and so I'm not. And he has had me till his field before to get ready for planting season. And in my 20s and 30s and 40s and even now, when he asks me to plow a field, I typically will have a podcast in, and I'll be plowing the field and I'll be like, squirrel. And Dad always gets mad at me because my rows do this. And Dad's are straight. And he keeps going, you have to Hold on to this thing and stare at a point so that you keep going down the right path. That's why we look to Jesus. We look to him and his endurance, and we go, if I just keep my gaze on him, I'm not paying attention to anything else. If I just focus on him, then I'm gonna run my race more effectively. And what's interesting about the Hebrew writer, he unpacks this beautiful language, and he talks about how each race is really different. Like, for instance, I've run a 5K, a 10K in my life. I've done some triathlons, and I can tell you every course is different. Some have uphills, some have downhills. Anytime I pick a race, I typically try to look for the ones that are flat or downhill. Every race is different. Your race is not going to be the same as mine. Your path in following Jesus, yes, we follow Jesus, but you're gonna have hurdles in your life that are different than my hurdles. And what we're told is that we are equipped for this race. So we look to Jesus. We don't get distracted by the things around him, nor do we do what the modern church does and look to ourselves for our own answers. Most Christians I know, most of them, do far more navel gazing than looking to Jesus to help them with the race. You know what navel gazing is? That's a Southern term for just sitting there going, navel gazing. Navel gazing. Some of you Californians just learned a Southern term, navel gazing. You'll say that at work tomorrow and everybody's like, what do you mean? And you'll go, navel gazing. And everybody's like, that's weird. I learned it at church. Okay, that's for free. We're to focus on him. And what I know about weight is when I was going through the airport with all of this stuff, I was thinking about the stuff and not my destination. Thinking about this stupid 80-pound chair that I put my baby in. Like, is it that safe? Right? As I'm sweating and pulling a shoulder out of socket, carrying this thing around, I'm thinking about the pain of this and not about the destination. As I'm slogging those 2 bags around and I'm just kind of trying to get through the airport, I'm thinking about my baggage and not about where we're going and the experiences we're gonna share and the life we're gonna live. For some of you in this room, you're the same. All you're focused on is your baggage. Your baggage has a control over you. It has defined your identity. You are your baggage. And when you come to church and have to deal with God in the moment and God says, I will remove that, you're kind of like, no. I like it because it's kind of a comfort to me. It gives me my identity. It allows me to feel like special. And Jesus is just saying, if you just get rid of this, you won't have to run so hard anymore. You'll make progress. You'll be set free. My goal in preaching this text, and I think the writer's goal of writing that text, is so that people could run a race with freedom. And I think there are people in this room, I know that there are people in this room who are running a race and you are just bogged down by the weight of life. I know that there's probably people in this room who walked in who said, you know what, this may be the last time I give church a chance because God can't help me with my depression. I know that I have all these anxieties and these fears, and yet nobody has ever helped me with these. God can't do anything for these, but I'm telling you, you lay aside the weight, you give it to God, you will experience a freedom like you've never experienced. How do you know that? Because I battled 2 or 3 years with depression. I know what it's like to have darkness and weight. I wasn't in sin. Because oftentimes we go, hey, you're in sin. That's why you're battling that thing. No, I wasn't in sin. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was loving my wife. I was providing for my family. And yet I could not get out of the darkness of depression. For me, it was like looking through a straw. The darkness was so strong. I had such tunnel vision. And I know there's people in this room who are dealing with the same stuff. I know there's people who are gripped by crushing anxiety. You're so fearful about the future, and you're worried. And yet the scripture tells us that we are to cast our cares upon him, meaning you throw them away and he'll take them. Jesus tells us in the Sermon on the Mount that if he cares about the fields of the earth and the birds of the air, how much will he care for his prized creation? You do not have to live with that anxiety. You can be set free of it. I know that there are people who've walked in the door with insecurities and pain and brokenness, and you're just wondering, is there hope for you? Yes. You can find freedom to run your race effectively if you just give it to God. But we have to have a starting place. There are people who walked in this room today who have sin, and you cannot be on your race with sin in your life. It will destroy you. The reason the Hebrew writer says that Jesus is the author and perfecter of our faith, meaning that everything starts with him and ends with him and has nothing to do with you. Nothing. The gospel tells us that Jesus dies and clothes us when we believe in him with his righteousness. So when God looks at you, he's not seeing you, he's seeing Christ's righteousness. And some of you have been working so hard to remove the sin from your life, and you will never be able to do it without Jesus. Never. It will always follow you around. So we got to deal with the sin issue first. So I want you to bow your heads, close your eyes. I don't want anyone looking around. The Bible tells us that sin leads to death. And the only way it can be solved is with confession and believing in Jesus that he has set you free from the bondage of sin. This is what the gospel is. It's about him. And if you have sin in your heart right now, you can confess it and be completely free and put on a new racetrack. So if there's anybody in this room, no one looking around, no one peeking up, if there's anyone in this room, if you have sin in your heart and you need to be set free and you need to come to Jesus for the very first time, would you just signify that by lifting up your hand? Yeah. All over the room. Church family, will you help me and let's pray this out loud. Dear Jesus, I'm a sinner and I need your forgiveness. I believe that you died and rose again. And I believe you cover up sin. I ask that you would cover it up for me and make me a new creation. In your name. Amen. Amen.